I left the military hospital with my 5-day-old baby clutching my stomach from a fresh surgical scar. My husband walked into my recovery room holding the hand of his billionaire boss. He threw divorce papers onto my tray, smirked, and told me to sign them. His mother followed right behind him, tossing a cheap duffel bag at my feet and screaming at me to take my baby and get out. I walked out into a freezing snowstorm with my child. Months later, he turned on the national news and completely froze. My name is Nicole. I am 33 years old. If you have ever been thrown away by the people who promised to protect you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to see how I dismantled their entire empire on live television. I sat on the edge of the stiff hospital bed, carefully adjusting the thin blanket around Leo. He was barely 5 days old. Every slight movement sent a sharp, burning ache through my abdomen where my stitches were still incredibly fresh. I looked up when the heavy door swung open, expecting to see a nurse. Instead, Bradley walked in. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled. But my eyes immediately fell on his right arm, which was wrapped tightly around the waist of Sylvia, the billionaire CEO of the defense contracting firm where he worked as a project manager. Sylvia wore a smirk that perfectly matched the sharp angles of her designer coat. Bradley did not even glance at the tiny baby resting in my arms. He stepped forward and slapped a thick stack of legal documents onto my rolling meal tray. "Sign it," he demanded, his voice completely void of any warmth. "Sylvia and I are closing a $1 billion security contract with the Pentagon this quarter. A wife with post-military depression who sits around unemployed all day is a massive stain on my corporate profile." I stared at the divorce papers, then up at the man I had married 3 years ago. "You are doing this now?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I just had your son, Bradley." Sylvia let out a dry, condescending laugh. "Do not play the victim, Nicole. Bradley is ascending to vice president of my company. He needs a partner who operates at his level, not someone who peaked as a military logistics analyst and then quit to be a housewife." She leaned over and pressed a deliberate, lingering kiss to his cheek. "I bought him out of his miserable life with you." Before I could respond to the sheer audacity of her statement, the door slammed open again. Brenda, my mother-in-law, stormed into the cramped room. She hurled a cheap, scuffed duffel bag onto the linoleum floor. The zipper broke open, spilling a few of my maternity shirts and Leo's plain white onesies. "Take your baggage and get out," Brenda yelled, pointing a manicured finger at the door. "I am done watching you drain my son dry. You think you can trap him with a baby just to live off his paycheck? That house in Virginia is in his name, and Sylvia just paid off the mortgage for him. You have no legal right to step foot on that property ever again." Bradley crossed his arms, looking down at me with absolute disgust. "My mother packed everything you own. The court will grant you some pathetic minimum wage alimony. Just take it and disappear, Nicole. You are a dead weight." They stood there, a unified front of arrogance and greed, fully expecting me to beg. They expected the unemployed woman they had spent the last 2 years belittling to break down and cry. They thought my silence was defeat. They had absolutely no idea that my supposed unemployment was a cover for the stealth software startup I had been building from the ground up. I reached for the pen resting next to my water cup. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled the divorce papers closer, flipped directly to the last page, and signed my name with a steady, fluid motion. I pushed the tray back toward Bradley. "Congratulations on your promotion," I said coldly. "I hope it cost you everything," Brenda scoffed, grabbing the signed papers eagerly. "Enjoy the homeless shelter," she spat out. I carefully scooped Leo into my arms, securing him against my chest to protect him from the harsh reality of his own family. I picked up the broken duffel bag with my free hand, ignored the searing pain in my stomach, and walked right past them. I did not look back. The automatic doors of the hospital lobby parted, hitting me with a blast of brutal, freezing wind. Snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets, covering the streets of Washington in a layer of white ice. I pulled my coat tighter around Leo, stepping out into the freezing storm. I took exactly 5 steps into the snow before a black armored SUV pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching heavily against the ice. The tinted passenger window rolled down to reveal Kendrick. The sharp-suited African-American corporate lawyer showed an expression of pure relief and intense focus. Kendrick was Bradley's brother-in-law, an incredibly brilliant legal mind, and the only person in that entire family who saw through Bradley's toxic facade. "Get in," Kendrick said, unlocking the doors. I knew they would pull something exactly like this. I climbed into the heated leather interior of the SUV, letting out a long breath as I secured Leo. I pulled my heavily encrypted laptop from my bag, typed a single command, and completely severed Bradley's access to his highly classified developmental server. He was locked out forever. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap. Let the real games begin right here and today. The heated leather seats of Kendrick's armored SUV offered immediate relief from the biting winter storm outside. I settled Leo into the car seat in the back row, ensuring his blanket was securely tucked around his tiny shoulders. A sharp pain shot through my lower abdomen as I leaned forward to buckle the safety straps. My fresh C-section incision protested the sudden physical exertion, sending a wave of nausea up my throat. I swallowed hard and forced my facial expression to remain blank. Physical weakness was a luxury I could no longer afford to indulge. Kendrick quickly pulled the vehicle away from the hospital curb, his eyes fixed on the icy road ahead. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the heavy snow. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with deep worry. "Are you all right, Nicole?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with genuine concern. "I am functioning perfectly," I replied. I ignored the throbbing pain in my stomach, opened my silver laptop, and watched the dark code terminal execute my final security commands. Kendrick shook his head slowly, a tight, humorless smile crossing his face. "Bradley is an absolute fool," he said quietly. "He spent the last 3 years treating you like a helpless trophy wife who simply stayed home to bake cookies and fold his laundry. He completely forgot the caliber of woman he actually married. He genuinely convinced himself that a former military logistics analyst magically lost her ability to think critically the moment she got pregnant." I watched a green progress bar hit 100% on my screen, locking in my digital barricade. He never bothered to understand my actual work, Kendrick. He always thought military logistics was just moving heavy boxes from point A to point B. He never grasped the complex cyber infrastructure required to secure billion-dollar defense supply chains. My cell phone shattered the quiet hum of the car engine. The screen illuminated the darkened back seat, flashing Bradley's name. I let the phone ring 3 times, allowing his panic to marinate, before tapping the accept button and putting him on speakerphone. "Nicole, what the hell did you just do?" Bradley screamed. His voice was shrill, echoing through the acoustics of the SUV. "I am sitting at the main security checkpoint for the Department of Defense Integration Facility. My high-level clearance badge just flashed red and the armed guards are telling me my administrative credentials have been permanently revoked." I typed a line of code, verifying the digital lockout was entirely irreversible. "I revoked your access, Bradley." I stated, my tone devoid of emotion. "Your login credentials were directly tied to the Alpha server framework I built. You no longer have authorization to use it." "You absolutely cannot do that to me," he yelled. The loud sound of an angry honking horn blared in the background. That specific server holds the entire structural backbone for Sylvia's massive new Pentagon bid. We are supposed to present that framework to the Defense Committee in exactly 2 hours. Turn the access back on right now, or I swear I will make you pay for this sabotage." I leaned much closer to the microphone. "You cannot present what you do not legally own, Bradley." I wrote every single line of that complex server framework from our dining room table while I was 8 months pregnant with the son you just abandoned. I engineered the encryption protocols. I built the secure data pathways. That entire digital architecture is my exclusive intellectual property. You and Sylvia merely leased my functional prototype because your company was too lazy to hire a real development team. That lease instantly expired the very second you handed me those divorce papers today. A loud scuffle sounded through the tiny speaker, followed by the sharp, authoritative voice of Sylvia herself. She had snatched the mobile phone directly out of Bradley's hand. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic little woman," Sylvia snarled into the receiver. Her usual billionaire composure was rapidly cracking under the severe threat of losing a massive federal contract. "You are going to restore that server access immediately. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with today. I can buy and sell you 10 times over before lunch." I remained completely silent, letting her unhinged arrogance fill the heavy air of the vehicle. Sylvia predictably took my calm silence as submission and pressed her attack further. "If that server is not back online in exactly 5 minutes, I will unleash a corporate legal team that will completely obliterate your entire existence. I will personally fund Bradley's custody battle against you. I will have my lawyers paint you as an unstable homeless and incredibly dangerous veteran. We will take that baby away from you so fast your head will spin, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life paying off our exorbitant legal fees. You will never see your child again. Restore the access, Nicole. This is your only warning." I looked at my newborn son in the rearview mirror. My chest tightened with a cold, calculated rage. I did not raise my voice or hurl useless insults. I simply pressed the end call button, abruptly cutting Sylvia off mid-sentence. I popped open the side slot of my cell phone, removed the SIM card, and snapped it cleanly in half. I rolled down my tinted window just enough to toss the broken plastic out into the raging blizzard. Kendrick reached into the center console, keeping his eyes on the icy road. He pulled out a sleek encrypted mobile device and handed it backward to me. "Here is your new secure line," he said, his tone shifting into pure professional focus. "They think they hold all the cards right now. They have absolutely no idea who they just declared war on." I took the new phone and synced it directly to my hidden servers. They are about to find out. The SUV tires gripped the cleared pavement as Kendrick steered us away from the city center and toward the heavily guarded perimeter of the military base. He turned down a private, unmarked road bordered by dense winter pines. At the end of the long driveway, a massive iron gate parted automatically as the vehicle approached. Behind it stood a modern architectural fortress of glass and dark steel, armed with top-tier biometric security scanners and thermal cameras. I carried Leo inside the warmth of the smart home, washing over my aching body. I walked directly past the luxurious living room and pushed open the solid oak door to my command center. 3 massive curved monitors illuminated the darkened room. I placed Leo in his bassinet beside the desk, logged in, using a dual fingerprint and retinal scan, and watched the Apex Dynamics logo pulse to life on the center screen. My anonymous stealth startup was no longer just a passion project. It was a fully operational digital arsenal. I spent the next 3 weeks operating entirely off the grid. While my physical body healed from the trauma of surgery, my mind was locked into the complex matrix of high-level defense contracting logistics. I systematically monitored every frantic, desperate move Bradley and Sylvia made, trying to bypass the locked server framework. They were completely blind to the fact that I watched their every failure. Exactly 21 days after the hospital betrayal, the perimeter proximity alarms chimed softly through the house speakers. I pulled up the front gate feed on my left monitor. Red and blue police lights flashed aggressively against the morning frost. 2 local patrol cruisers blocked the entrance. Bradley stood shivering by the intercom speaker, wearing a trench coat and looking perfectly distraught. Brenda stood right behind him. I watched my mother-in-law clutch a ridiculously expensive designer baby carrier against her chest. I stepped away from the monitors, picked up Leo, and walked out the front door to face them. I remained completely silent and perfectly calm as I moved across the pristine driveway. The frigid air bit at my exposed skin as I approached the heavy wrought iron gate. The taller police officer placed his hand resting casually on his heavy leather duty belt. "Ma'am, open the gate." The officer ordered, his tone laced with authoritative impatience. "We have a temporary emergency custody order issued by a family court judge. Your ex-husband states that you are a homeless, unemployed veteran suffering from severe mental instability. He claims you absconded with his infant son and are squatting in an unoccupied property." I looked at Bradley. He was attempting to squeeze out a single tear for the police officers. "Nicole, just give me my son back," Bradley pleaded, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. "You are sick. You do not even have a job or a roof over your head. I just want to get Leo into a safe, warm environment before you do something completely irrational." He desperately hoped his pathetic performance would convince the local authorities to break down my security gate and hand him my child. Brenda stepped out from behind the officers, practically shaking with eager anticipation. She tapped the side of the designer baby carrier. "Hand him over right now," Nicole, Brenda demanded, dropping the concerned grandmother act the second she made eye contact with me. "Sylvia has a beautiful nursery waiting for him at the penthouse. You have absolutely nothing to offer this child. You are a complete failure who threw away her career to be a burden. Now you are a criminal. The police are going to take you to a psychiatric ward, and we are going to take the baby." The officer stepped forward, tapping the folded legal document against the iron bars. "Ma'am, if you do not comply with this emergency order and surrender the child to his father immediately, I will have to place you under arrest for child endangerment and trespassing. We are going to force this gate open." I held Leo closer to my chest, making absolutely no move toward the electronic gate release button. I stared directly at Bradley, watching the arrogant smirk start to form on his face. He actually thought his paperwork trick had worked. He thought he had backed me into a corner. The heavy wooden front door of the house clicked open behind me. Kendrick walked down the paved driveway. He was wearing a razor-sharp navy blue tailored suit, looking every inch the elite corporate powerhouse. He carried a thick leather portfolio under his arm. He bypassed me entirely, walked straight up to the iron gate, and slipped a thick stack of heavily stamped certified legal documents through the metal bars directly into the police officer's hands. "Officer, my name is Kendrick Davis, acting legal counsel for this woman," Kendrick stated smoothly, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "The emergency custody order you are currently holding is entirely invalid because it was obtained under penalty of perjury. My client is not a homeless squatter." The officer frowned, unfolding the stack of certified papers. He scanned the top page, his eyes widening slightly as he read the official county seals. "This is a deed of trust," the officer mumbled, looking from the paperwork to the massive modern fortress behind us. Kendrick smiled a cold, calculated smile. "That is correct, officer. My client legally owns this $1.5 million estate outright. She is standing on her own private property." Bradley's jaw dropped open. Brenda stumbled backward, nearly dropping the designer carrier in the snow. Kendrick looked right at Bradley, adjusting his jacket cuffs. "It is a serious federal crime to intentionally lie to a family court judge to obtain an emergency warrant, Bradley. The local police authorities are not here to arrest my client. They are here right now because I personally called them exactly 10 minutes ago to report an extremely severe trespassing violation against you both." The heavy mahogany doors of the Fairfax family court swung open, and the sheer arrogance radiating from Bradley was instantly suffocating. I sat perfectly still beside Kendrick at the petitioner table. Across from us, Bradley adjusted the cuffs of a tailored suit that I had actually paid for last Christmas. He sat flanked by 3 high-priced corporate litigators. Right behind him in the gallery sat Sylvia. She wore a bright red designer dress and crossed her legs, inspecting her manicured nails, as if this custody hearing over a newborn infant was nothing more than a tedious delay for her. Sylvia let out a loud theatrical sigh when the judge entered the room, making sure everyone knew she felt her valuable time was being completely wasted. The proceedings began with Bradley and his lead attorney painting a tragically false picture of a hard-working executive burdened by an unstable, deadweight wife. To deeply cement their narrative, they called their star witness to the stand. Brenda practically marched up to the wooden witness box, swearing her oath with an eager, vindictive glare fixed entirely on me. When Bradley instructed his lawyer to begin the questioning, Brenda did not hold back today. She leaned into the microphone and unleashed a rehearsed monologue designed to completely assassinate my character. She told the judge that I was a profoundly lazy, dependent woman who used my military discharge as a permanent excuse to avoid contributing to society. She testified that I spent the last 3 years confined to the guest bedroom, pretending to type on a laptop all day, while Bradley worked himself to the bone to provide a roof over my head. She described how I drained his bank accounts to fund a secretive, delusional lifestyle, buying expensive computer equipment while refusing grocery shopping. Brenda even managed to fake cry, pressing a dry tissue to her face, claiming she had to personally buy diapers for Leo because I was too financially irresponsible and mentally checked out to prepare for my own child. I listened to her weave this action-based backstory of my supposed incompetence without breaking eye contact. I remembered those long days in the guest bedroom. I was not pretending to type. I was architecting a revolutionary cyber defense algorithm that her son and his new billionaire girlfriend were currently trying to steal. When it was our turn, Kendrick stood up quickly. He buttoned his dark suit jacket and approached the witness box with the calm, predatory grace of a man who held a royal flush. He smiled politely at Brenda. Mrs. Wilson, Kendrick began, his voice echoing clearly in the quiet courtroom. You just testified under oath that Nicole was a financial parasite who drained your son and his accounts while contributing absolutely nothing to the household. Is that correct? Brenda lifted her chin defiantly. Yes, it is. She completely ruined his credit score. She is a financial disaster and a terrible mother. Kendrick nodded slowly, pulling a single paper out. Tell me, Mrs. Wilson, do you have any actual proof of this financial drain? Have you personally reviewed their joint bank statements, or are you simply repeating what your son told you to say today? Brenda scoffed, gripping the edge of the wooden stand. I do not need to look at pieces of paper to know what I saw with my own 2 eyes. Bradley paid for everything. The house, the cars, the food. She was a complete leech. Kendrick turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Defense Exhibit A into evidence right now, please, sir. It is a certified forensic accounting of the couple and their finances over the exact 3-year period Mrs. Wilson just described. The bailiff handed the thick bound document to the judge. Kendrick walked back toward Brenda. Mrs. Wilson, since you are so confident in your son and his financial supremacy, you might be surprised by page 4 of that report. It shows that Bradley and his entire salary went directly toward his personal luxury car lease, his expensive golf club memberships, and his frequent high-end restaurant dinners. Brenda narrowed her eyes, glancing nervously at Bradley sitting nearby us. Kendrick raised his voice slightly, ensuring the gallery heard every word. The report clearly proves that the mortgage on the Virginia house, all the utility bills, the groceries, and even your own son and his tailored clothing were completely funded by my client. Nicole paid for 100% of their living expenses from her military pension and her independent consulting contracts. Bradley did not support her. She entirely subsidized his luxury lifestyle while building her own technology firm. Brenda gripped the microphone, her face flushing a deep, angry purple. That is a total lie, she shouted extremely loud today. She is unemployed and she does not have a firm. Kendrick ignored her outburst, turning back to the judge. Your Honor, the petitioner claims my client is an unfit, neglectful mother who relies on him for survival. The financial truth is completely the opposite. Furthermore, Bradley Wilson claims he is the dedicated, protective father, fighting for the safety of his newborn son. He claims my client kidnapped the child after a mental breakdown at the hospital. Bradley and his lawyer jumped up shouting an objection, but the judge waved him down, deeply engrossed in the financial statements Kendrick provided her. "I would like to submit one final piece of evidence," Kendrick announced. "We subpoenaed the internal security footage from the military hospital." A large monitor flared to life on the courtroom wall. The soundless video showed the narrow hallway outside my recovery room. The entire courtroom watched in absolute silence. On screen, Bradley and Sylvia exited the room. A nurse had placed newborn Leo in his car seat on the floor. Bradley physically stepped completely over his own son, ignoring him entirely to hold the door open for Sylvia. The judge stared her face, turning to solid, angry, unyielding stone. The courtroom remained locked in a stunned, heavy silence as the security footage faded to black. Judge Harrison stared at the blank monitor for a long moment. When she finally turned her gaze toward the petitioner table, the absolute fury in her eyes made Bradley physically shrink into his expensive leather chair. "You stepped over your newborn son," Judge Harrison stated, her voice slicing through the room like a steel blade. "You stepped over an infant in a hospital hallway to open a door for another woman, and you have the audacity to come into my courtroom and claim you are the protective parent in this situation," Bradley stammered, scrambling for a coherent excuse. "Your Honor, the camera angle is highly misleading," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the intense scrutiny. "I was simply ensuring the corridor was clear for his safe transport." Judge Harrison slammed her wooden gavel down with enough force to make Brenda jump in the gallery. "Do not insult my intelligence, Mr. Wilson," the judge snapped. "I have seen the financial records proving your absolute dependence on the very woman you attempted to paint as a homeless vagrant. I have seen you commit perjury by filing a false emergency custody order. I have seen the undeniable video evidence of your profound parental neglect. The ruling is immediate and unequivocal. I am granting Nicole Wilson full sole legal and physical custody of the minor child Leo." Bradley slammed his fists onto the heavy wooden table, his face flushing a violent, patchy red. "You cannot do this to me," he screamed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of courtroom decorum. "She is a fraud. You are giving my son to a psychotic, unemployed liar." Two armed bailiffs instantly stepped forward, placing their heavy hands firmly on Bradley's shoulders and forcing him back into his seat. He thrashed against their tight grip, yelling baseless threats at the bench. Judge Harrison did not even blink at his wild outburst. Furthermore, she continued, completely ignoring his tantrum. "I am ordering you to pay maximum state guideline child support retroactive to the date of separation, along with covering 100% of the respondent's legal fees for this entirely frivolous proceeding. This court is adjourned." Sylvia stood up from the gallery bench, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. Her face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. She glared at me, her eyes promising absolute destruction, before she turned on her heel and stormed out of the double doors, with Bradley trailing pathetically behind her. They had lost the courtroom battle, but Sylvia was not a woman who accepted defeat. She operated in a world where money dictated reality, and she immediately weaponized her massive corporate influence to strike back. 2 days later, my phone vibrated with an automated alert from the military credit union. Sylvia had leveraged her high-level banking connections to place an illegal indefinite administrative freeze on the joint pension account I still shared with Bradley. It was a blatant violation of federal banking regulations, a move designed to completely sever my access to my hard-earned military retirement funds. She wanted to choke off my liquid cash flow. She believed that without immediate access to those funds, the expensive smart home mortgage would quickly default. My limited resources would dry up, and I would eventually be forced to crawl back to court and beg them for financial mercy. Sylvia wanted to starve me out and watch me break. I sat in the ergonomic mesh chair of my home office, staring at the red notification banner displaying the frozen account status on my right monitor. I did not panic. I did not call Kendrick to file an emergency injunction. I simply took a slow sip of my black coffee, dragged the banking window to the trash bin, and pulled my primary coding terminal to the center screen. Sylvia severely underestimated the profitability of Apex Dynamics. The joint pension account was pocket change compared to the offshore corporate accounts I had accumulated through independent contracting. I cracked my knuckles and let my fingers fly across the mechanical keyboard. Lines of complex encryption protocols cascaded down the dark screen. I was currently rewriting the core architecture of a revolutionary cyber defense algorithm. This specific code was designed to dynamically identify and neutralize hostile infiltration attempts within global military supply chains. It was the exact logistical framework that Bradley had attempted to claim as his own, the exact technological backbone that Sylvia desperately needed to secure her company's future. I refined the final loop, sealed the encryption layer, and initiated the primary compilation sequence. The massive system hummed quietly, processing the heavy data load with flawless precision. Just as the compilation progress bar hit 99%, the heavy silence of the room was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic ringing. It was not my standard cellular device. The sound originated from the sleek, heavily encrypted satellite phone resting on the corner of my desk. This specific secure line was given to me during my active duty, logistics tenure, a direct, untraceable connection to the highest levels of the Department of Defense. I picked up the heavy black receiver, pressing it securely to my ear, without saying a word. The line crackled briefly, with advanced encryption static, before a deep, familiar voice spoke. "Nicole, it is General Vance," the voice stated, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "We have a critical situation developing in Washington. The Defense Committee just reviewed the preliminary tech submissions from the private sector. The framework your ex-husband's firm submitted is a catastrophic, unmitigated disaster. They are completely locked out of the alpha server, and their substitute code is full of severe security vulnerabilities." General Vance paused, letting the heavy implications settle. "We know you are the actual architect behind the original framework, Nicole. We need your logistical expertise leading the new billion-dollar cyber defense bid, and we need you right now." I accepted General Vance immediately. The Pentagon established a covert channel with Apex Dynamics, putting me in direct command of the nation's most critical cybersecurity initiative. My days became a blur of high-level encrypted meetings and relentless coding. An embossed gold envelope arrived via courier at my secure compound. It was a VIP invitation to the annual Global Defense Alliance Charity Gala in Washington. The host of the evening was none other than Sylvia. Bradley and his new billionaire patron had orchestrated this specific invitation with malicious intent. They wanted to parade their supposedly superior status in front of the very military colleagues who used to respect me. Bradley was desperate to publicly showcase his upgrade to cement the narrative that I was a broken veteran while he was ascending the corporate throne. Kendrick stood in my office staring at the gold cardstock with deep disapproval. "Do not walk into this trap, Nicole," he warned, his arms crossed over his chest. "They control the venue, the guest list, and the narrative. Sylvia is hosting this event explicitly to humiliate you in front of the defense community. You have nothing left to prove to these people." I traced the raised gold lettering of the invitation with my index finger. "I am not going there to prove anything, Kendrick," I replied quietly. "I am going to inspect the battlefield. They think I am a wounded animal hiding in the shadows. It is time I show them the actual predator they invited inside their gates." The night of the gala, a thick layer of frost covered the Capitol, but the entrance to the grand ballroom was heated and bathed in brilliant floodlights. Valets rushed to open the doors of arriving luxury vehicles. I stepped out of the heavy, armored SUV, completely shedding the tired housewife persona Bradley had forced upon me for 3 long years. I wore a floor-length midnight blue silk gown with a sharp architectural neckline that commanded absolute attention. My hair was styled in a sleek, severe sweep, and I wore no jewelry aside from a simple silver watch. I did not need diamonds to project power. Absolute authority radiates from within, and I possessed it in abundance. As I walked up the red carpet, conversations around the entrance physically stopped. Several high-ranking military officials and defense contractors, men and women I had worked alongside during my active-duty logistics tenure, turned and stared. They remembered the quiet, exhausted pregnant woman who used to stand silently behind Bradley at company dinners. The woman walking into the ballroom tonight was a complete stranger to them. I bypassed the press line and stepped into the cavernous hall. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling light over hundreds of Washington elite. The room buzzed with the sound of clinking champagne glasses and strategic networking. I barely had time to accept a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter before the inevitable ambush occurred. I was examining a massive, intricately carved eagle ice sculpture near the center of the room when the suffocating scent of Sylvia and her expensive perfume washed over me. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of hiding," Sylvia announced. Her voice was intentionally loud, designed to draw the attention of the surrounding generals and corporate executives. She wore a glittering emerald dress, a champagne flute held loosely in her manicured hand. Bradley stood right beside her, wearing a smug, practiced smile. Brenda was positioned just behind his shoulder, practically vibrating with malicious excitement. Sylvia stepped into my personal space, ensuring the surrounding crowd could hear every single word. "I honestly did not think you would have the courage to show your face here, Nicole. But then again, I suppose the free food is a nice change of pace for an unemployed single mother." The nearby guests awkwardly paused their conversations, watching the confrontation unfold. Sylvia smiled a wide, predatory grin. "In fact, since tonight is all about military charity, I feel obligated to do my part. My company is expanding our server facilities next week. The janitorial staff needs an extra hand to sweep the data center floors. I can pull a few strings and offer you the job. We always try to provide charity to struggling veterans who cannot keep up with the real world." Brenda let out a harsh, barking laugh. "You should take the offer, Nicole." Brenda sneered loudly. "It is the only way you will ever get close to a real defense contract again." Bradley shook his head with mock pity. "Just leave quietly, Nicole. You are embarrassing yourself by being here. You do not belong in this room anymore." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Sylvia. The surrounding crowd waited for me to crumble or flee in tears, expecting the defeated victim Bradley described for weeks. Instead, I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. I stepped closer to Sylvia, invading her space with absolute unyielding confidence. "I appreciate the generous employment offer, Sylvia," I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the quiet ballroom. "However, I am afraid I would not feel secure working inside your facilities." I tilted my head slightly, inspecting her confusion. "I spent the morning reviewing your company and the proposed logistics network. I was genuinely surprised by your outdated firewall matrix." Sylvia stiffened, her arrogant smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" She snapped, her voice losing its theatrical projection. I leaned in, lowering my voice, so only she, Bradley, and the immediate circle of defense officials could hear the technical execution. "I am talking about your gateway protocol. You still run the legacy Titan algorithm on your primary data nodes. That configuration has a massive vulnerability in the secondary routing sequence. A decent hacker could bypass your encryption layer in exactly 14 seconds. I smiled, watching the blood drain from Sylvia in her face. "That flaw is the exact reason the Pentagon rejected your miserable substitute code this afternoon." Sylvia stared at me, the color draining from her carefully contoured face. Her emerald dress suddenly seemed too tight as she struggled to draw a breath. She knew I was right. The Titan algorithm flaw was the most tightly guarded secret in her corporate infrastructure, and I had just dismantled it in front of the very people she was trying to impress. However, Sylvia was dangerously resilient. The shock in her eyes quickly hardened into a sharp, venomous glare. She forced a stiff, condescending laugh, attempting to brush off my technical assessment as the ravings of a jealous outsider. She locked eyes with Bradley and gave him a commanding nudge forward just as a highly decorated four-star general approached our circle. It was General Vance, his uniform adorned with rows of medals, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the tense gathering. Sylvia immediately seized the opportunity to control the narrative. She hooked her arm through Bradley and his elbow, pulling him directly into the general and his path. General Vance, what an absolute pleasure, she purred, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. I apologize for the disruption. Bradley and I were just dealing with a minor security issue. She gestured toward me with a dismissive wave. This is Nicole. She is Bradley and his disgruntled ex-wife. We try to be accommodating to her mental health struggles, but she has a habit of showing up uninvited to harass us. Bradley took his cue, adopting a look of profound, long-suffering exhaustion. He let out a heavy sigh. It is incredibly embarrassing. General Bradley added, his voice coated in fake apology. She refuses to accept the divorce and keeps making baseless claims about our tech infrastructure. We are currently getting a restraining order, but tonight we wanted to focus on the charity effort. Please forgive her outburst. I simply stood perfectly still, letting their orchestrated humiliation hang in the air. I did not raise my voice, and I did not defend my presence. Instead, I softened my expression, adopting a look of polite, naive concern. I am so sorry for causing a scene, I said, pitching my voice to sound entirely harmless and intimidated. I certainly did not mean to sound hostile. I am honestly just worried for Bradley. The Department of Defense audit schedule is notoriously brutal this quarter. I know how stressful federal compliance can be when you are handling sensitive military logistics. I tilted my head, looking directly at Sylvia with wide, innocent eyes. I simply do not understand how your team manages to pass the federal data inspections while running those older legacy systems. It must be incredibly difficult to keep the auditors satisfied when the core matrix is so outdated. The bait was perfectly placed, targeting the exact center of Sylvia and her massive ego. The implication that she was struggling to maintain compliance, that she was overwhelmed by federal oversight, was an insult she could not tolerate, especially not in front of a general and her partner. Her pride instantly overrode her caution. Sylvia scoffed, stepping closer to me, her eyes flashing with absolute arrogance. She wanted to crush my naive assumption and prove her supreme corporate dominance. You really have no idea how the modern defense industry operates, do you? Sylvia sneered, her voice carrying a tone of absolute supremacy. We do not struggle with federal auditors, Nicole. We control them. The Defense Department relies on automated compliance tracking for their quarterly reviews. My engineering team wrote a custom shell code that acts as a localized mirror. When the federal diagnostic programs ping our servers, our shell code intercepts the request and feeds them a completely fabricated, fully compliant data loop. The auditors never actually see our live operational servers. They only see the pristine simulation we programmed for them. We bypass their entire security protocol without them ever realizing they are looking at a phantom system. It is brilliantly efficient, and it eliminates the need to upgrade our legacy hardware. Bradley nodded enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the legal catastrophe unfolding right out of his own mouth. It saves us millions in hardware upgrades, he bragged, eager to share in the supposed glory. The government inspectors are too bureaucratic to realize they are being redirected. It is standard practice for firms operating at our elite level. They had just confessed to federal fraud, intentional data manipulation, and conspiring to deceive the Department of Defense. They had admitted to multiple severe felonies, boasting about them in a crowded ballroom. What neither Sylvia nor Bradley knew was that the small diamond brooch pinned near the collar of my midnight blue gown was not a decorative fashion accessory. It was a military-grade high-definition recording device provided directly by the Pentagon Security Division. Every arrogant word, every detailed explanation of their illegal shell code, every boastful admission of deceiving federal auditors was currently streaming live to a secure Department of Defense server. I gently brushed my fingers against the cool surface of the diamond brooch, a silent signal to the surveillance team monitoring the feed that the objective had been successfully acquired. I maintained my polite, deferential smile. That is truly fascinating, I said softly. I had no idea your company was so innovative. Sylvia smirked, victorious in her own mind. I suggest you stick to sweeping floors, Nicole. Corporate strategy is clearly beyond your comprehension. She turned her back to me, dismissing my existence entirely, and offered her brightest smile to General Vance. Now, General, if you have a moment, Bradley and I would love to discuss the upcoming supply chain contracts. General Vance completely ignored Bradley and his eagerly outstretched hand. He walked directly past him, deliberately stepping out into the freezing Washington night air and opened the heavy door to my waiting armored car himself. Your report was absolutely flawless, Chief Advisor, the General stated very loudly for everyone to hear. Bradley was left standing there in total, absolute, and uncomprehending shock. The morning sunlight sliced harshly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury downtown penthouse. He paced across the rug, gripping his phone until his knuckles turned white. He could not erase the image of General Vance, a man who commanded absolute authority across the global defense sector, holding the door for Nicole. Brenda sat comfortably on the white leather sofa, sipping an espresso, with an infuriatingly calm expression. Bradley stopped pacing and glared at his mother. "You are not listening to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with unchecked anxiety. The General called her chief advisor. He completely ignored me, brushed right past my outstretched hand, and treated Nicole like she was a visiting dignitary. Something is severely wrong. Brenda rolled her eyes carefully, setting her delicate porcelain cup down on the glass coffee table. "You are overreacting, Bradley," she stated, waving her hand in a deeply dismissive gesture. "It was a complete fluke. The military is obsessed with optics and public relations right now. Nicole is a discharged veteran who just won a highly publicized custody battle. The General was simply playing the political game by showing basic courtesy to a struggling former service member. He probably felt sorry for her after seeing her standing near the ice sculpture in that cheap rented dress." Bradley shook his head, running his trembling hands through his perfectly styled hair. It did not look like pity, he insisted, his heart hammering against his ribs. It looked like profound professional respect. "You did not see the way the entire room shifted when she walked in. She was not acting like a broken housewife. She acted like she owned the entire building." Brenda let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. "Please," she scoffed. "Nicole has absolutely zero connections, no money, and no firm. She is trying to intimidate you because she knows Sylvia holds the real power. You need to focus on securing your future with Sylvia and stop letting your delusional ex-wife live rent-free in your head." Across the city, inside the heavily fortified glass and steel headquarters of Omnitech Solutions, a completely different type of panic was unfolding. Sylvia slammed the heavy oak door of her executive boardroom shut with enough violent force to make the reinforced glass walls violently rattle. She marched to the head of the massive obsidian conference table, her face a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. Her entire senior engineering team sat frozen in their ergonomic chairs, their complexions pale and their eyes wide with fear. The massive digital display board at the front of the room flashed with bright red warning notifications. The Department of Defense had initiated a surprise deep-level zero-notice forensic audit of their entire operational framework. This was not the standard automated ping they were accustomed to manipulating. The Pentagon had deployed a specialized team of military cyber analysts who were manually tearing through Omnitech and their source code layer by layer. Sylvia slammed her manicured hands flat against the polished wood. How did they bypass the shellcode? She screamed, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "We built that mirror protocol to deflect these exact inspections." Her lead systems architect, a man named David, who looked like he had not slept in 4 days, nervously adjusted his glasses. He swallowed hard before answering. "They did not bypass our shellcode, Ms. Vance. They completely neutralized it. The military deployed a brand new compliance tracking algorithm overnight. It is aggressively hunting for fabricated data loops. They know exactly what we are doing. They are demanding immediate access to our live operational servers. And if we let them in, they will instantly see that our core software is fundamentally broken. Our entire infrastructure violates every single new military standard instituted this morning. We are totally exposed. Bradley burst into the boardroom at that exact moment, completely bypassing her administrative assistant. He was breathless, his suit slightly wrinkled. Sylvia. I came as soon as I heard he started, but the words died in his throat as Sylvia turned her lethal, furious gaze onto him. She practically launched herself across the room, stopping mere inches from his face. "Do you have any idea what is happening right now?" she shrieked. Her composed billionaire facade shattered. "If we fail this surprise audit, the Pentagon will instantly terminate the billion-dollar defense contract. If we lose that specific contract, this entire company will be immediately liquidated. We will go utterly bankrupt, Bradley. My investors will strip me of everything, and you will be left with absolutely nothing." Bradley physically recoiled, the reality of total financial ruin finally penetrating his thick skull. "But we have your engineering team," he stammered, looking desperately at the terrified employees around the table. "They can patch the vulnerabilities. They can rewrite the code before the military analysts finish their sweep." Sylvia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob of pure panic. David, the lead engineer, stood up slowly. His hands trembled as he placed a single thin file onto the heavy boardroom table. "We cannot fix this," he stated, his voice dropping to a grim whisper. "Our foundational architecture is entirely obsolete. The new federal standards require a dynamic, self-evolving defense matrix. There is absolutely no way our team can build that from scratch in time to save this contract." Sylvia stared at him, the remaining color draining from her cheeks. "Are you telling me it is completely over?" she asked, her voice hollow. David shook his head slightly, pushing the file toward her. "Not entirely," he replied, his eyes darting nervously between Sylvia and Bradley. "I ran a global search through the dark web and private sector development boards. There is only one piece of software in the entire world that can instantly repair our system and guarantee we pass this military audit. It is a truly flawless, revolutionary algorithm. But it belongs to a highly secretive anonymous startup called Apex Dynamics." Bradley locked himself inside the glass-walled executive suite at Omnitech Solutions. The ambient lighting felt harsh against his exhausted face. He had spent the last 14 hours staring at a glowing monitor, desperately searching through encrypted defense contractor databases and obscure technology forums. His expensive tailored suit jacket was discarded on the floor, and his silk tie hung loosely around his neck. Sylvia had given him an absolute ultimatum. He either found a way to contact the anonymous architect behind Apex Dynamics, or he could pack his bags and forget about the promised vice president title. The impending Department of Defense audit was a ticking time bomb. If the military analysts broke through their fabricated shellcode before they could patch the foundational matrix, the billion-dollar contract would instantly evaporate. Bradley knew his luxurious lifestyle depended entirely on Sylvia retaining that federal wealth. He hammered his fingers against the keyboard, bypassing standard search engines to dig into restricted beta testing registries. The name Apex Dynamics was an enigma. There were no listed corporate officers, no physical headquarters, and no public records. The company existed strictly as a digital ghost, a phantom entity that had engineered the most advanced military algorithm on the planet. Bradley rubbed his bloodshot eyes, his desperation mounting with every dead-end link. He needed to prove to Sylvia that he was a vital asset. He finally stumbled upon an obscure, heavily encrypted landing page hidden deep within a routing server. The page displayed nothing but a stark black background with a single brutalist white text box. It was the direct communication portal for Apex Dynamics. Miles away from the suffocating panic of the Omnitech boardroom, morning sunlight poured warmly through the bay windows of my kitchen. I sat at the marble island, comfortably dressed in a soft cashmere sweater, gently feeding pureed sweet potatoes to Leo. He cooed happily, completely unaware of the digital warfare his mother was orchestrating. Kendrick stood leaning against the refrigerator, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. He was dressed in his usual sharp litigation suit, but his eyes were entirely focused on the glowing screen of the secure tablet resting on the counter. The contrast between my peaceful domestic reality and the absolute chaos unfolding across the city was poetic. Kendrick let out a low, deeply amused chuckle as he monitored the incoming web traffic routing through my private servers. "They are completely melting down," Nicole, Kendrick stated, his voice laced with profound satisfaction. Omnitech server logs show their engineering team has been running continuous, frantic diagnostic tests for the past 16 hours. They are hitting a brick wall every single time. The federal audit protocol is actively chewing through their legacy defenses like paper. I wiped a stray drop of sweet potato from Leo and his chin. "Sylvia built an empire on theft and intimidation," I replied calmly. "She believed she could simply buy whatever intelligence she needed to maintain her throne. Now she is trapped in a room with a collapsing ceiling, and all her money cannot buy her a reinforced beam." Kendrick tapped the tablet screen, bringing up a separate encrypted dashboard. "Bradley is currently pinging the decoy contact portal you established for Apex Dynamics," Kendrick noted. "He has been refreshing the gateway connection every 30 seconds for the past hour. The man is sweating bullets." I smiled, setting the baby spoon down. Let him sweat. Back in the Omnitech suite, Bradley practically slammed his hand onto his mouse. He stared at the blank white text box on the Apex Dynamics portal. He had no leverage, no technical specifications to offer, and no corporate collateral to utilize. All he had was Sylvia and her rapidly draining bank accounts. He began typing frantically, his fingers slipping over the keys in his absolute haste. He abandoned all professional etiquette, crafting an email that reeked of profound, unfiltered desperation. "To the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Dynamics," he wrote, "I represent Omnitech Solutions, a premier federal defense contractor. We are currently facing an unprecedented infrastructure emergency regarding our gateway protocols. We know you possess the adaptive algorithm required to modernize our systems. We are prepared to offer an immediate non-negotiable licensing fee of $20 million for emergency access to your software. We will bypass standard corporate negotiations and wire the funds directly to your preferred offshore accounts today. Please respond immediately." Bradley did not bother to proofread the pathetic message. He did not care that he was essentially begging a stranger and exposing the extreme vulnerability of Sylvia and her company. He clicked the submit button, watching the text box clear itself. He slumped back in his leather chair, his heart hammering against his ribs, praying the phantom architect on the other side of the screen would take the bait. The tablet on my counter chimed with a notification. Kendrick raised an eyebrow, sliding the device across the island. "It seems your ex-husband has finally decided to beg, Kendrick," remarked a hard edge of triumph in his voice. I picked up the tablet, reading through the frantic, highly unprofessional email Bradley had just submitted. The sheer desperation bleeding through his words was pathetic. He was throwing Sylvia and her money at the problem, assuming cash could purchase his salvation. He was about to learn a very brutal lesson about the true cost of betrayal. I handed Leo a small teething toy and pulled the tablet closer. I tapped the reply icon, my fingers moving with deliberate precision. I did not accept his financial offer, and I did not acknowledge his frantic timeline. I typed a single ruthless sentence establishing my dominance over his fate. "We will discuss the licensing terms during a blind virtual meeting at precisely noon today." I hit send, locking the encryption layer to ensure the message was untraceable. I looked up at Kendrick, a cold, unyielding smile spreading across my face. "Let us see how much your soul is worth, Bradley." The atmosphere inside the Omnitech executive boardroom was suffocating. Sylvia paced the length of the obsidian table, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She chewed on the inside of her cheek, a physical manifestation of the panic clawing at her composure. Bradley sat rigidly opposite the display screen, adjusting his silk tie. The digital clock shifted to precisely noon. Sylvia stopped pacing and slammed her hand onto the back of his chair. "Connect the feed," she ordered, her voice trembling with suppressed hysteria. "Do not let them see we are desperate, Bradley. You negotiate this like we hold the leverage. Tell them we are doing them a massive favor by looking at their obscure program." Bradley nodded quickly, desperate to prove his worth. He initiated the secure handshake protocol, bypassing standard firewalls to establish a direct link with the Apex Dynamics server. The wall monitor flickered, dropping its corporate logo and transitioning to a pitch-black void. Miles away in the safety of her kitchen, Nicole sat perfectly still before her encrypted laptop. Kendrick leaned over her shoulder, his fingers dancing across a secondary keyboard to finalize the audio routing parameters. He activated the deepfake overlay, instantly replacing Nicole and her video feed with a sleek, featureless, digitized silhouette. Next, he engaged the vocal modulator. It was a sophisticated piece of military-grade encryption software that stripped away all identifying human frequencies, rendering the speaker into a synthesized metallic drone. Nicole adjusted her headset, watching the Omnitech boardroom materialize on her screen. She saw Bradley looking pale and sweating profusely sitting next to Sylvia, whose forced glare masked her terror. Nicole tapped the spacebar, opening the audio channel. Apex Dynamics. The modulated synthetic voice echoed through the Omnitech boardroom speakers, vibrating with heavy bass. "We are online. State your business." Bradley cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone. He puffed out his chest, attempting to channel the ruthless corporate persona he rarely achieved. "Yes, good afternoon," Bradley began, projecting an air of supreme boredom. "I am Bradley, representing Omnitech Solutions. We reviewed the specifications of your compliance algorithm. It shows minor promise, though the architecture is admittedly quite raw. However, my engineering team believes we can salvage the core framework and integrate it into our legacy systems." Sylvia nodded approvingly, folding her arms to project unwavering authority. "We are willing to do you a tremendous favor," Bradley continued, a smug smirk stretching across his face. "As an industry leader, Omnitech can put your nobody startup on the map. We are prepared to offer a buyout for the exclusive software license. We will generously wire $2 million to your account today. $2 million is significantly above market value for an unproven product from an anonymous team. You take this deal and you can retire tomorrow. We will handle the heavy lifting." A low, synthesized, amused laugh rumbled out of the boardroom speakers. The metallic sound was completely devoid of warmth, immediately erasing the smug expression from Bradley and his face. $2 million, the voice mocked the digital distortion, making the words slice like razor blades. "You must be confusing me with someone who does not have unfettered access to your internal financial servers, Bradley." Sylvia dropped her arms, stepping closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. "What exactly are you implying?" she demanded, betraying a hint of raw panic. "I am not implying anything, Sylvia," the voice countered smoothly, absolute dominance ringing through the speakers. "I am stating cold, undeniable facts. Your current stock prices have been artificially inflated for 3 quarters. You are hemorrhaging capital, trying to maintain the facade of profitability while your legacy systems collapse. Furthermore, your little problem with the Department of Defense is not a minor glitch. The Pentagon cyber analysts have breached your third firewall. They are 12 hours away from discovering the fraudulent shellcode you used to fake your federal compliance." Bradley opened his mouth to protest, but the voice cut him off with brutal efficiency. "Do not bother lying," the synthesized drone commanded. "If you lose that defense contract tomorrow, Omnitech Solutions will be completely liquidated by Friday. Your investors will abandon you, your assets will be seized, and the federal government will initiate a criminal investigation into your corporate fraud. You are not offering me $2 million out of generosity. You are offering it because it is the absolute maximum amount of liquid cash you can scrape together without alerting your hostile board of directors. You do not hold the leverage here. You are a sinking ship, and I am the only life raft in the entire ocean." Bradley stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing. He looked desperately at Sylvia, who was clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the dark wood. She looked as though all the oxygen had been vacuumed from the room. "The terms of this negotiation are remarkably simple," the voice stated, dropping to a dangerous, uncompromising register. "I do not want your equity, your partnership, or your corporate favors. The price for the exclusive license to the Apex Dynamics compliance algorithm is exactly $50 million. Bradley gasped, physically recoiling from the microphone. 50 million, he choked out his voice, cracking violently. That is utterly impossible. We cannot liquidate that kind of capital without triggering a massive shareholder panic. We would have to mortgage the entire commercial campus. That sounds like a structural problem for your finance department, the voice replied indifferently. $50 million in cash. The price is non-negotiable. You have 48 hours to sign the licensing agreement. If the funds are not cleared by Thursday noon, I will sell the software to your biggest corporate rival, Titan Logistics. The screen went entirely black as the digital connection was abruptly severed. Sylvia stared at the blank monitor for 3 agonizing, endless seconds. She raised her shaking fist and slammed it violently against the heavy oak desk in total, unadulterated panic. The sound of Sylvia striking the desk hung in the boardroom. $50 million in 48 hours was impossible for a company drowning in fabricated financial reports. Sylvia knew attempting to pull that amount of liquid cash through standard board approvals would instantly expose her ongoing fraud. The directors would demand audits, shareholders would panic, and the contract would vanish before the money cleared. Panic morphed into destructive energy. Sylvia turned to her lead financial officer, issuing reckless commands. She ordered the liquidation of prime commercial real estate, accepting buyout offers at a fraction of their actual market value. When that barely scratched the surface, she crossed a line bordering on criminal negligence. She commanded her finance team to empty the corporate safety nets, bleeding employee pension reserves and draining emergency operational funds. It was financial suicide, but she was blinded by the absolute terror of losing her empire. Even after stripping her company down to the studs, Sylvia was still $10 million short. With traditional banking avenues closed due to inflated credit ratings, she turned to the darkest corners of corporate finance. She secured toxic predatory bridge loans from unregulated private lenders, agreeing to astronomical interest rates and putting up her own personal assets as collateral. Her empire was bleeding out, and she willingly held the knife. Bradley watched this financial meltdown with awe and absolute terror. He realized Sylvia was risking everything, and if he did not match her commitment, he would be instantly discarded. Sylvia made this explicitly clear when she cornered him, her eyes wild with stress. She demanded Bradley prove his loyalty. If he wanted the vice president title and a guaranteed share of the company, he needed to put skin in the game. He needed to quickly find the remaining $5 million to finalize it now. Bradley was desperate. He had no substantial savings, having squandered his salary on luxury cars and expensive suits to maintain his wealthy facade. He had only one remaining asset he could exploit, the sprawling Virginia estate where his mother Brenda currently lived. The property was technically in his name, a manipulative financial arrangement he had orchestrated years ago. Bradley drove straight to Virginia, bypassing pleasantries the moment he walked through Brenda and her pristine front door. He pitched the situation not as a desperate scramble to avoid federal prison, but as the most exclusive, lucrative tech investment of the decade. He paced around her meticulously decorated living room, weaving a masterful web of lies. He told Brenda that Sylvia was allowing him to buy directly into a revolutionary software patent that would triple in value overnight. He claimed it was a guaranteed return, a golden ticket to generational wealth. Brenda listened with wide, greedy eyes, her absolute faith in her golden child overriding any basic financial common sense. Bradley told her he was taking out a massive high-interest mortgage on the Virginia house, but he needed more. He needed everything she had. Driven by pure greed and the intoxicating promise of elevating her social status, Brenda agreed without a single moment of hesitation. She logged into her accounts and systematically drained her entire life savings. She liquidated her retirement funds, cashed out her modest mutual funds, and transferred every single cent she owned into Bradley and his account. She signed the secondary mortgage papers, literally betting her home and her entire financial future on Bradley and his non-existent business acumen. Feeling incredibly victorious and intoxicated by the illusion of impending wealth, Brenda poured herself a glass of expensive wine. She looked around her Virginia home, convinced she would soon be trading it in for an even grander estate. The overwhelming urge to gloat consumed her. She wanted to punish the woman she believed was entirely responsible for dragging Bradley down for so many years. She picked up her smartphone and dialed my number, a cruel, satisfied smirk stretching across her face as the line rang. She wanted to make absolutely certain that I knew exactly how spectacularly my ex-husband was succeeding without me. When the call connected, Brenda did not even wait for a greeting. She launched directly into a vicious, calculated tirade. She bragged that Bradley was in the process of closing a massive historic technology deal that would elevate him to the highest ranks of corporate royalty. She boasted about the millions of dollars they were investing, claiming that their family was about to reach a level of wealth I could not even comprehend. She called me a pathetic loser, a bitter, abandoned woman who would spend the rest of her miserable life struggling to pay rent while Bradley conquered the world. I sat perfectly still at my kitchen island, the morning sunlight catching the steam rising from my coffee mug. Kendrick stood silently beside me, his arms crossed, a dark, amused smile playing on his lips. I had placed my phone face up on the marble counter, the speakerphone activated, letting Brenda and her shrill, insulting voice fill the quiet room. I did not interrupt her rant. I did not defend myself, and I did not offer a single word of anger. I simply let her talk, allowing her to dig her own grave with every boastful, arrogant syllable. While Brenda continued to scream about my failures, and Bradley and his immense corporate power, I shifted my attention to the encrypted laptop resting directly in front of me. The screen glowed with a secure digital transmission from Omnitech Solutions. It was the finalized licensing agreement. Sylvia and Bradley had actually done it. They had destroyed their own financial foundations, mortgaged their homes, and drained their entire corporate reserves to meet my non-negotiable demand. The digital escrow account confirmed the receipt of $50 million in completely untraceable liquid cash. Brenda paused her tirade to take a breath, waiting for my emotional breakdown. I looked at the flashing green button on my screen. I reached out and finally pressed approve. The euphoria of securing Brenda and her life savings evaporated the exact moment Bradley reviewed his offshore routing accounts. A glaring red deficit stared back at him from the glowing monitor. He was still exactly $1 million short of the $5 million Sylvia demanded for his corporate buy-in. The predatory bridge loans were entirely maxed out. His personal credit was completely frozen. He paced the length of his lavish office, the glass walls suddenly feeling like a suffocating prison. He needed capital, and he needed it instantly. His mind, conditioned by years of absolute entitlement and unchecked cruelty, immediately pivoted to his favorite target, Nicole. If he could somehow force her to drop her retroactive child support and alimony claims, he could easily leverage that cleared debt against a high-risk corporate payday loan. He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling with raw malice. He drafted a text message dripping with venom. It was not a simple request. It was an outright vicious threat. He typed furiously, stating that if Nicole did not immediately sign away all her financial claims, he would personally fabricate severe psychological evaluations. He threatened to submit these forged mental health records directly to the Department of Defense, initiating a hostile review that would permanently revoke her military security clearance and entirely destroy her government advisory career. He hit send, a smug, arrogant smirk, temporarily replacing his panic. He truly believed he held the absolute power to terrify her into immediate submission. Inside my sunlit kitchen, the sharp notification chime broke the comfortable domestic silence. Kendrick did not even wait for me to reach for the phone. As my lead legal counsel and the brilliant architect of my current defense strategy, he had securely mirrored all incoming communications from Bradley directly to his own encrypted tablet. Kendrick picked up his device, his dark eyes scanning the glowing text. A sharp, predatory smile spread across his handsome face. Bradley just handed us the decisive nail for his very own coffin. Kendrick stated, his voice ringing with absolute professional delight. He turned the screen toward me so I could read the threat. I felt a brief, phantom echo of the intense fear Bradley used to instill in me during our marriage. But that old fear was entirely gone, replaced by a cold resolve. I held Leo closer and nodded once. Kendrick immediately went to work. He did not draft an emotional reply. He did not engage in a pointless text battle. He bypassed Bradley entirely and went straight for the jugular. Kendrick compiled the digital footprint of the text message legally, verifying the origin server and the exact timestamp. Within 20 short minutes, he drafted a lethal legal response and filed it directly with the federal district court. He filed an emergency airtight restraining order against Bradley, citing malicious harassment and targeted violent threats. But Kendrick did not stop there. He forwarded the blatant extortion attempt directly to the State Bar Association and the senior managing partners at the law firm representing Bradley, demanding immediate sanctions against them for allowing their client to engage in documented criminal blackmail. Bradley thought he was playing a simple game of intimidation. Kendrick masterfully turned it into a federal extortion trap. Bradley received the official notification of the restraining order and the impending legal sanctions while sitting inside his luxury car outside the Omnitech building. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him sickly pale. His lawyer called him mere seconds later, screaming obscenities through the speakerphone and formally dropping him as a client on the spot. The child support leverage was permanently gone. The reckless threat had backfired spectacularly, leaving him entirely out of viable options. He stared at the clock on his leather dashboard. He had exactly 3 hours left before Sylvia and her deadline expired forever. Total desperation breeds catastrophic decisions. Bradley marched directly into the Omnitech facility and locked himself securely inside his private office. He bypassed his standard corporate workstation and logged into a secure, untraceable terminal he had installed months ago for illicit activities. He knew Sylvia kept a private, highly encrypted offshore emergency account hidden in the Cayman Islands. She exclusively used it to hide unvetted corporate bonuses from the IRS. Bradley had memorized the complex routing numbers during a late-night drunken strategy session. His hands shook violently as he initiated a highly illegal backdoor sequence. He was crossing a massive line from which he could never ever return. He was stealing from the very woman who held his entire future in her perfectly manicured hands. He typed in the authorization codes successfully, bypassing the secondary security protocols with a stolen key. He held his breath, his finger hovering over the mouse. He clicked the transfer button. $1 million instantly vanished from Sylvia and her hidden reserve, quietly routing through a complex maze of shell corporations before landing securely in his own buy-in account. He aggressively wiped the terminal clean, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had the money. He had secured his coveted vice president title. But he had just signed his own absolute death warrant if Sylvia ever checked her personal ledgers. The 48-hour deadline arrived with the suffocating weight of an impending execution. The Omnitech boardroom was eerily silent. Sylvia sat at the head of the obsidian table, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the digital contract displayed on the primary monitor. She carefully typed her digital signature. Bradley sat beside her, sweating through his expensive suit, his stolen million deposited in the joint escrow account. The document from Apex Dynamics required 2 digital signatures to finalize the $50 million transfer and unlock the algorithm. Sylvia stared at the screen, her empire hanging by a thread. She reached slowly forward, her manicured finger trembling slightly. Bradley leaned in, mirroring her actions, sealing his fate alongside hers. They pressed the final submission button, binding them to the company forever. The digital progress bar on the massive Omnitech boardroom monitor crawled toward 100% with agonizing slowness. Bradley held his breath, his stolen millions securely bundled within the $50 million wire transfer, now hurtling through cyberspace. Beside him, Sylvia gripped the edge of the dark mahogany table so tightly her knuckles turned white. A sharp melodic chime echoed through the silent room. The screen flashed a green confirmation graphic. The funds had successfully cleared the international routing protocols and vanished into the impenetrable void of the Apex Dynamics holding accounts. The money was gone. It was an unfathomable amount of liquid capital, representing the entirety of Sylvia and her corporate safety net alongside Bradley and his stolen, desperate contribution. I stared at the nine-figure balance, feeling a wave of profound calm wash over me. They actually did it, Kendrick murmured, his voice laced with a potent mixture of awe and predatory satisfaction. They bled themselves dry for a ghost. I picked up my coffee mug, feeling the warmth against my palms. They signed the contract without a single moment of technical due diligence, I replied smoothly. Desperation is the enemy of basic competence. Back in the Omnitech executive suite, the suffocating tension evaporated, replaced by a wave of intoxicating, arrogant euphoria. Sylvia let out a sharp, breathless laugh, her rigid posture shifting from terrified to triumphant. She walked briskly to the wet bar tucked into the corner of the boardroom and retrieved a bottle of vintage champagne she had kept chilled for absolute emergencies. Bradley slumped back in his leather chair, running a trembling hand through his slick hair. A massive, arrogant grin spread across his face. He had survived the impossible odds. He had secured his vice president title, and he had permanently cemented his value to Sylvia. He was untouchable. Sylvia popped the cork, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot of victory. She poured the bubbling liquid into 2 crystal flutes and handed one to Bradley. To the future of Omnitech Solutions, Sylvia declared, raising her delicate glass high. And to a billion-dollar Pentagon contract securely locked inside our vault. We just bought our salvation. Bradley clinked his glass against hers, taking a deep, greedy swallow. They thought they had us cornered, Bradley sneered, his corporate confidence restored. But we just purchased the most advanced military compliance algorithm on the planet. Let the Department of Defense auditors try to break through our firewalls now. We are going to make those government analysts look like complete amateurs. They drank their expensive champagne, reveling in their perceived brilliance, entirely convinced they had successfully outsmarted both the federal government and the anonymous architect behind Apex Dynamics. While Sylvia and Bradley celebrated their imaginary victory with expensive alcohol, I set my coffee mug down on the marble island. It was time to fulfill my end of the legally binding agreement. Kendrick stepped back, giving me full access to the primary keyboard. I initiated the secure handshake protocol, connecting directly to the Omnitech engineering servers. Their IT department was already pinging my gateway, requesting the data packet download to begin their system integration. They were eager to get the code running securely before the Department of Defense initiated their scheduled audit protocols at the break of dawn. I opened the master repository for the Apex Dynamics software suite. The directory displayed dozens of highly advanced, constantly evolving iterations of the powerful compliance algorithm. The latest version was a masterpiece of digital engineering, an impenetrable fortress of code that could withstand the most rigorous military cyber attacks imaginable. It was genuinely worth every single penny of $50 million. But I had absolutely no intention of giving them my masterpiece today. I pulled up the finalized licensing contract they had signed in their haste. I read the specific clauses, the legal definitions, and the exact deliverables promised. They had negotiated blindly, focusing on the price and the strict timeline, while completely neglecting to specify the actual definitive version of the software required. I clicked past the advanced folders, scrolling all the way down to the bottom of the encrypted archive. I located a buried file labeled version 1.0. It was the original fundamental prototype I had coded years ago in my spare bedroom. Legally speaking, it was the exact Apex Dynamics algorithm they had purchased. It contained the foundational architecture and the proprietary signatures required to fulfill the contract perfectly. I was delivering precisely what they bought, down to the final line of code. However, version 1.0 was a relic. It was a clunky, outdated piece of legacy software that lacked all modern adaptive defenses, dynamic routing, and threat recognition protocols. It was a digital dinosaur. This version was essentially a fragile skeleton, totally incapable of masking the massive and fraudulent shellcode Sylvia had aggressively deployed across her internal networks. It would immediately flag every single irregularity directly to the federal investigators the moment the formal review officially commenced. If Omnitech integrated this specific code into their mainframe, it would successfully register as the Apex Dynamics software, but it would provide absolutely zero protection against a modern military audit. The Pentagon analysts would slice through the outdated firewalls in less than 3 minutes. I highlighted the prototype file and attached it to the secure transfer gateway. A cold, ruthless smile touched my lips as I reviewed the payload. I reached out and pressed the enter key, watching the obsolete data packet surge through the fiber optic lines toward the Omnitech servers. I picked my coffee back up, savoring the rich, dark flavor. Let them enjoy their champagne tonight. Tomorrow their entire empire burns to the ground. The champagne was still bubbling in their crystal flutes when the first klaxon echoed through the Omnitech executive suite. It was not a digital chime, but a blaring, relentless siren originating from the engineering floor below. Sylvia froze, the triumphant smile sliding off her face like melting wax. Bradley nearly dropped his drink, the expensive liquid splashing onto the mahogany table. The secure line on the boardroom console flared red, indicating an emergency override from the chief technology officer. Sylvia slammed her hand onto the receiver, her voice sharp and demanding an immediate explanation. Down in the sub-zero climate of the main server room, chaos had instantly consumed the engineering team. The lead architect, Marcus, was frantically hammering across his mechanical keyboard. Sweat dripped down his forehead, fogging his glasses. He had received the encrypted payload from Apex Dynamics precisely on schedule. He executed the integration sequence, expecting the algorithm to seamlessly merge with their firewalls and shield their fraudulent shellcode from the impending federal audit. For the first 30 seconds, the progress bar hummed along in reassuring green. Then a catastrophic cascade of critical failure notifications painted the massive wall monitors in blinding crimson. The system was actively, violently rejecting the military integration protocols. Marcus watched in horror as the imported software began systematically dismantling Omnitech and their legacy defenses instead of fortifying them. It was not recognizing the modern encryption keys required by the Department of Defense. Worse, the crude architecture of the code was clashing directly with their servers, creating massive digital vulnerabilities. The Pentagon cyber analysts were scheduled to begin probing in less than an hour, and Marcus was staring at a network that was completely stripped bare. Every fabricated compliance report, every hidden financial deficit, and every piece of illegal shellcode was now sitting unprotected, illuminated like a beacon for the government to find. The boardroom doors flew open, hitting the walls with a crack. Sylvia stormed into the server room, her designer suit snapping around her legs. Bradley trailed behind her, his face drained of color, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "Fix it immediately," Sylvia roared, her voice cutting through the blaring alarms and the shouting coders. "You told me the Apex software was the definitive solution. Why is the entire network flashing critical failure?" Marcus did not turn around to face her. His eyes remained locked on the scrolling lines of code and the digital licensing contract he had forced open on a secondary monitor. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "This is not the definitive solution," Marcus yelled, the panic in his voice, overriding his usual subservience to the chief executive. "This is a graveyard. The code they transmitted is a prehistoric skeleton. It has zero dynamic threat recognition, no adaptive routing, and no modern military compliance capabilities. It is tearing our network apart because it does not understand the basic language of our operating system." Bradley pushed forward, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the back of Marcus in his chair. "That is impossible," Bradley stammered, rejecting the reality unfolding before him. "They guaranteed the compliance framework." We paid $50 million for the most advanced algorithm on the market. Read the contract. Marcus aggressively scrolled down the document, highlighting a block of legal text buried deep within the technical specifications appendix. I am reading the contract, Bradley Marcus shouted, tapping the monitor hard enough to make it sway. Look right here. You did not purchase a modern updating security suite. You authorized the purchase of the Apex Dynamics as-is legacy framework. There are no promised upgrades. There is no technical support clause. There is no guarantee of compatibility with current Department of Defense security standards. You blindly bought version 1.0. This is legally exactly what you signed for, and it is entirely useless to us. The words hung in the freezing air of the server room. The blaring security alarms faded into a dull, echoing roar in his ringing ears. He stared at the highlighted text, the uncompromising legal jargon spelling out his total, undeniable ruin. He had not just failed to save the company. He had actively accelerated its destruction. He had handed over $50 million of liquid capital for a worthless string of obsolete code. Sylvia slowly turned her head to look at Bradley. The expression on her face was no longer panicked. It was a mask of cold, murderous fury. Her eyes were completely dead, locking onto him with the intensity of a predator about to strike. "You incompetent fool!" Sylvia hissed, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "You negotiated this disaster. You vetted this phantom company. I emptied the pension funds. I mortgaged my entire corporate portfolio for $50 million based on your arrogant assurances. We are bankrupt, Bradley. We are holding a worthless piece of junk, and the federal government is going to dismantle us by morning." Bradley shoved Marcus aside, desperately taking control of the keyboard. He pulled up the secure encrypted email thread, his sweaty fingers slipping over the keys. He drafted a frantic, desperate message, abandoning all professional corporate posturing. He begged for the updated patch, offering them equity, offering to pay more money, offering absolutely anything they wanted to correct the oversight. He clicked the submit button, praying frantically to whatever deity would listen, that the anonymous software architect would show mercy. A fraction of a second later, a harsh digital chime echoed from his inbox. It was an automated system response. Bradley opened it, his blood turning to solid ice in his veins. The return message was a stark, unyielding, automated delivery failure. The text was brutal and final. Address no longer in service. Please try again, later. Bradley stared blankly at the screen, the horrific, fatal truth finally crushing the last remaining breath from his lungs. There was no deployment error. There was no accidental technical glitch. They had been flawlessly, legally, and permanently scammed by a ghost. The delivery failure notification burned into Bradley like a branding iron. Sylvia stood frozen, her champagne flute trembling so violently that the expensive liquid spilled across the polished mahogany table. She turned toward him, her expression shifting from fury to cold, hollow terror. They had $50 million riding on a phantom server, and the Department of Defense would audit their systems in less than 12 hours. Bradley slammed his fist against the keyboard, desperately trying to salvage the catastrophic reality crumbling around them. He could not tell her the truth. He could not admit that he was fundamentally responsible for negotiating a legally flawless scam. Instead, he resorted to the only survival tactic he had ever truly mastered. He lied. He spun his chair around, forcing a mask of frantic confidence onto his sweating face. "It is a simple routing error," Bradley insisted, his voice cracking slightly. "The legacy framework is just the outer shell. The dynamic updates are probably locked behind a secondary firewall delay. Give me until dawn. I will personally rewrite the integration bridge to adapt to our systems before the federal auditors log on." Sylvia glared at him, her chest heaving. She had no other options left. She pointed a trembling finger at the door, demanding he fix it or face complete ruin. While Bradley descended into a frantic coding session, Brenda was blissfully unaware of the disaster. High above the city in their lavish penthouse, she orchestrated a celebration fit for royalty. Tomorrow morning, the Department of Defense was scheduled to announce the Omnitech contract, and Brenda intended to bask in the glory. She directed caterers through the massive kitchen, arranging silver platters of caviar and chilling imported champagne bottles. She invited 20 superficial friends for a breakfast watch party. She polished her diamond ring, convinced her husband had secured their financial supremacy. She texted Bradley a photo of the floral arrangements, oblivious that the man she married was currently sweating through his suit, staring at lines of obsolete code he could not comprehend. Hours later, the recycled air of the server room became far too suffocating to endure. The legacy code remained a brick wall, violently rejecting every integration attempt. He needed a moment to step away from the glowing monitors, spelling out his doom. He took the private elevator down to the grand lobby of the Omnitech building. The space was completely empty, silent in the early hours of the morning, or so he thought. A figure stepped out from the shadows near the revolving glass doors. Kendrick stood perfectly composed, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that made him look like a sleek, predatory shark. He held a thick manila envelope in his right hand. Bradley froze in his tracks, a new wave of adrenaline flooding his exhausted system. "What are you doing here?" Bradley demanded, his voice echoing loudly against the marble walls. "You are trespassing." Kendrick did not flinch. He walked forward with measured, confident steps, his expensive leather shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. "I am simply acting as a dedicated messenger for my client," Kendrick replied smoothly. He extended the envelope. "This is the finalized court-ordered child support judgment, fully executed by the federal judge. Your accounts will be garnished starting tomorrow. There is no appeal left to file." Bradley snatched the envelope, crushing the thick paper in his sweaty fist. He let out a harsh, desperate laugh. "You think I care about this right now?" Bradley sneered, desperately trying to maintain his alpha persona. "I am about to close a billion-dollar military contract. I can pay this petty judgment with the loose change from my upcoming executive bonus. You and Nicole are nothing but annoying parasites." Kendrick stopped smiling. The professional amusement vanished from his handsome face, replaced by a look of profound, chilling pity. He looked at Bradley, not as a rival, but as a tragic, fundamentally broken creature who had absolutely no idea what was happening. "You truly have no concept of reality," Kendrick said quietly, his voice echoing with absolute certainty. "I look at you, and I genuinely wonder how you managed to survive this long. Do you remember the early years of your marriage, Brad? Do you remember coming home at 4 in the morning reeking of cheap alcohol and other women?" Bradley narrowed his eyes, confused and angered by the sudden shift in conversation. "What does that have to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with right now," Kendrick replied, his dark eyes locking onto Bradley. "While you were out destroying your liver and your vows, Nicole was awake. She was sitting at a tiny, cramped desk in the spare bedroom, drinking stale coffee and typing on a cheap laptop. She stayed up until dawn, night after night, coding. She was building complex algorithms, testing security frameworks, and mastering languages you cannot even pronounce. She was constructing an absolute empire while you were busy being a pathetic, arrogant fool." The blood rushed in Bradley's ears. His mind scrambled, trying to connect the dots Kendrick was so deliberately laying out. "You thought she was just some quiet, obedient wife you could break down and control?" Kendrick continued, stepping 1 inch closer. "You severely underestimated her intelligence, and you catastrophically overestimated your own. You never actually knew who you were married to, did you? You lived in the exact same house with a genius, and you treated her like dirt. Now that same genius holds your entire pathetic existence in the palm of her hand." Bradley swallowed hard, his throat dry and scratchy. He clutched the envelope tighter, his knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about?" Bradley whispered, the panic returning in full force. Kendrick did not answer the question directly. Instead, he calmly reached up and adjusted his perfectly knotted silk tie. His expression was a portrait of lethal satisfaction. "I highly suggest you watch the DoD broadcast closely tomorrow, Brad. Make sure you do not blink." The morning sun poured through the massive windows of the luxury penthouse. Brenda floated through the living space holding a silver tray of caviar canapes. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with Sylvia and her corporate investors, alongside Brenda and her friends. They clinked champagne flutes and laughed loudly. A massive television dominated the far wall tuned to the national news network. The volume was muted, displaying a placeholder graphic for the impending Department of Defense press conference. Sylvia stood near the center, radiating arrogant confidence. She was dressed in a sharp crimson suit, accepting premature congratulations from her venture capitalists. She truly believed the $50 million transfer had secured their future. Bradley stood near the kitchen island, his stomach twisting into painful knots. He was sweating straight through his custom shirt. The ice in his glass rattled because his hands would not stop shaking. He had spent the entire night locked in the server room, desperately trying to bypass the archaic Apex legacy code. He had failed completely. The Omnitech network was currently sitting wide open, exposing every piece of fraudulent financial data and illegal shellcode directly to the federal auditors. He took a gulp of his drink, his eyes darting toward the heavy front door. He calculated the exact distance and wondered if he could simply sprint out before the broadcast began. But his feet remained glued to the marble floor, paralyzed by pure terror. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, surrounded by people about to watch his destruction on live television. Brenda clapped her hands together, pointing a manicured finger at the television screen. The volume surged upward as the graphic vanished, replaced by the stark seal of the United States Department of Defense. The investors immediately stopped talking, turning their full attention to the broadcast. Sylvia smiled smugly, crossing her arms and nodding toward the screen. A distinguished Pentagon spokesperson stepped up to the polished wooden podium, flanked by two military officials in full uniform. The room grew silent, the tension shifting from celebratory anticipation to sharp, focused attention. The spokesperson adjusted the microphones and looked directly into the camera. "Good morning," the man stated, his voice ringing with absolute, uncompromising authority. "Today, the Department of Defense is officially announcing the results of our comprehensive cybersecurity audit regarding the upcoming billion-dollar infrastructure contract. This initiative requires the absolute highest standard of digital fortification, adaptive threat recognition, and impenetrable compliance protocols. Our military networks demand flawless execution, and our auditing teams have worked relentlessly through the night to evaluate the final candidate submissions." Bradley felt his knees buckle slightly. He gripped the edge of the marble island so hard his fingernails dug into his own palms. The spokesperson flipped open a leather binder on the podium, his expression hardening into a look of severe disapproval. "Before we announce the recipient of this historic contract, we must address a matter of grave national security regarding one of the primary candidates." Sylvia frowned, her perfect posture stiffening. The investors exchanged confused, nervous glances. Brenda stopped offering her tray, a look of blank incomprehension plastered across her face. The spokesperson looked down at his official documents. "During our automated integration tests initiated at dawn this morning, our Cyber Command analysts uncovered severe systematic discrepancies within the servers of Omnitech Solutions." Sylvia let out a sharp gasp. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. Several investors stepped away from her, the atmosphere in the penthouse plunging into sudden dread. The Pentagon spokesperson did not hold back, his voice echoing through the silent living room like a judge delivering a death sentence. "Omnitech Solutions attempted to bypass our security protocols using an obsolete legacy software framework completely devoid of modern defensive capabilities. Furthermore, this catastrophic failure exposed a massive network of fraudulent shellcode designed specifically to deceive federal auditors. Because of this blatant deception and their entirely compromised technology infrastructure, Omnitech Solutions is hereby permanently disqualified from this bidding process and all federal contracts. The Department of Justice has already been notified, and formal fraud investigations are currently underway. Bradley could not breathe. The room started to spin. The words permanently disqualified and fraud investigations hammered into his skull. Omnitech was not just out of the running, it was completely obliterated. Sylvia and her entire empire had been liquidated on national television. The venture capitalists began muttering in panicked tones, pulling out their phones to frantically dump their shares. The penthouse went completely suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the sharp shatter of crystal. Brenda dropped her wine glass. It hit the marble floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces, the dark red liquid splashing across her expensive designer shoes. She stared at the television, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. Sylvia snapped. She spun around, her eyes wide with a feral, unhinged madness. She lunged across the living room, ignoring the shattered glass, and grabbed Bradley violently by the collar of his shirt. "You ruined me!" Sylvia screamed, her voice tearing through her throat, spittle flying from her lips as she shook him. "You promised me it was secure." The investors shouted in alarm, trying to pull the screaming executive off the paralyzed vice president. Bradley did not fight back. He stared blankly over her shoulder at the massive television. The Pentagon spokesperson raised his head, completely oblivious to the utter devastation he had just unleashed inside the Connecticut penthouse. He turned to the next page in his leather binder, his voice returning to a smooth, professional cadence. Following the immediate elimination of Omnitech, we proceeded with the secondary evaluations. The billion-dollar contract is instead awarded to the developer with the highest security rating, Apex Dynamics. The live national broadcast continued without interruption, the sharp, clear audio easily cutting through the incredibly suffocating, agonizing silence of the luxury penthouse. The Pentagon spokesperson finally stepped back from the polished wooden podium, his severe expression rapidly shifting from stern military condemnation to profound, genuine professional respect. He paused for a brief dramatic moment of absolute anticipation. He then gestured warmly toward the deep shadows located at the far side of the expansive stage. The camera angle immediately widened smoothly, capturing the heavy dark velvet curtains masking the hidden wings of the press room. The spokesperson leaned back into the silver microphone, his deep voice echoing loudly through the completely silent, deeply horrified Connecticut penthouse. "It is my distinct honor to introduce the brilliant visionary architect behind the most impenetrable digital fortress this federal department has ever evaluated," he announced, his tone ringing with absolute admiration and undeniable awe. "Please welcome the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Dynamics." The heavy velvet curtains slowly parted to finally reveal the brilliant hidden architect. Nicole stepped out into the blinding glare of the national media spotlight. She did not hesitate. She did not flinch. She strode across the polished floor with a terrifying, predatory grace that commanded absolute attention. She was wearing a razor-sharp, flawless charcoal power suit that radiated absolute authority and supreme confidence. Her posture was rigidly commanding, a stark and stunning contrast to the exhausted, subservient posture she had maintained for years inside Bradley and his oppressive, suffocating shadow. Her dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, professional style, exposing a face carved from pure ice and relentless determination. She approached the podium, shaking the military spokesperson by the hand with a firm, confident grip. She turned and looked directly into the primary broadcast camera. Her dark eyes were piercing, an unbroken, lethal stare that felt as though it was reaching right through the television screen, traveling across the country, and staring directly into the souls of the people standing paralyzed inside the penthouse. She offered a small, terrifyingly calm smile to the world. She looked exactly like a woman who had just conquered the entire corporate and military landscape simply because she finally decided to stop hiding her unparalleled brilliance from the men who sought to diminish her. Inside the luxury living room, the oxygen completely vanished. Bradley stumbled backward, his highly polished dress shoes slipping wildly on the spilled champagne and shattered crystal covering the marble floor. His legs gave out entirely, turning into useless jelly beneath his sudden dead weight. He crashed backward over a white leather accent chair, his limbs tangling awkwardly as he hit the ground with a heavy, humiliating thud. He lay there on his back, gasping for air like a dying fish on a dock, his hands clawing desperately at his silk designer tie as if it were a hangman noose rapidly tightening around his throat. He stared up at the massive flat-screen monitor, his reality completely fracturing into a million irreparable pieces. The powerful, untouchable woman standing proudly on the national television broadcast was his ex-wife. The exact same woman he had relentlessly mocked financially, starved, continually threatened, and viciously discarded for being utterly useless, was the anonymous tech genius who had just legally stolen $50 million from his new employer. She had single-handedly destroyed his entire career, decimated his unearned ego, and orchestrated his ultimate humiliating ruin, without ever having to leave the comfort of her kitchen island. Brenda stood absolutely frozen near the kitchen counter, clutching her chest as a sickly, terrifying gray pallor washed over her heavily contoured face. She could not speak. She could barely process the visual input from the high-definition screen flashing brightly across the room. Her entire meticulously planned future was dissolving right in front of her eyes. The massive diamond engagement ring on her finger suddenly felt like a heavy, worthless chain pulling her straight down to the bottom of a cold, dark ocean. The lavish, perfectly catered breakfast watch party had instantly transformed into a silent, horrifying corporate funeral. One of Sylvia and her primary venture capitalists, an older, ruthless man who had just watched his 8-figure investment evaporate into thin air within a matter of agonizing seconds, pointed a violently trembling finger at the glowing television screen. He turned his horrified, bloodshot gaze toward the crumpled, hyperventilating form of Bradley, currently thrashing on the floor. "That is the unemployed loser," the senior investor asked, his voice cracking loudly, with absolute unadulterated disbelief and rapidly rising panic. "You explicitly told us she was a pathetic, uneducated parasite who brought absolutely nothing to the table." Sylvia did not look at the television screen. She did not look at the panicking investors, nor did she look at the quietly sobbing Brenda. Slowly, mechanically, Sylvia turned her dead shark-like eyes downward toward the floor, where Bradley was desperately struggling to pull oxygen into his seizing lungs. The terrifying, undeniable truth had finally materialized completely inside her ruthless, calculating brain. The separate, isolated pieces of the ultimate corporate trap suddenly clicked together into perfect, devastating alignment. She realized exactly what had happened. She realized exactly who had played her from the very beginning, and exactly who had delivered her blindly and willingly, directly into the absolute slaughterhouse. She stepped forward over the broken glass, her expensive designer heels crunching loudly against the crystal shards. She leaned down with terrifying intent, grabbing Bradley firmly by the collar of his ruined, sweat-soaked shirt. She hauled his heavy upper body off the ground with shocking strength, pulling his terrified, pathetic face mere inches from her own. Her grip was like forged iron, cutting off his airway even further as she glared into his panicked eyes. "Your ex-wife is the CEO of Apex." Sylvia whispered, her voice a deadly vibrating hiss that instantly silenced the entire room. "You just gave her $50 million of my money." The broadcast echoed through the shattered atmosphere of the penthouse. Nicole adjusted the microphone with a calm precision that made Bradley feel sick. She did not look like the woman he had discarded. She looked like a predator who had patiently waited for her prey to walk into a meticulously designed trap. The camera zoomed as she began her address. Her voice was steady and completely devoid of the hesitation Bradley had always demanded from her. She launched into a technical breakdown of defense logistics, mapping out the architecture of her dynamic threat recognition algorithm. She spoke of military compliance frameworks and adaptive firewall protocols with absolute mastery that left the Pentagon officials nodding in respect. Bradley watched his former wife dissect complex cybersecurity paradigms that he could not comprehend. She was flawless. Then Nicole paused, looking into the camera lens with a cool stare. "Progress in the digital age requires absolute ruthlessness," Nicole stated, her voice carrying a sharp double meaning. "We cannot build the impenetrable networks of tomorrow while clinging to the fragile architecture of the past. True security is only achieved by identifying and discarding outdated and toxic systems that drain our resources and compromise our integrity. Apex Dynamics was built on that exact philosophy. Bradley felt the words land like physical blows. Every venture capitalist in the room turned to stare at him with pure loathing. Sylvia finally released her grip on his collar, shoving him backward in disgust. He hit the marble floor hard, scrambling away from her fury. Sylvia ignored him, pulling her phone from her jacket. Her fingers flew across the screen as she dialed her counsel. The room remained silent, listening to her breathing as she waited for the connection. When the lawyer answered, Sylvia screamed into the receiver. "I want an injunction filed immediately. I want Apex Dynamics sued into oblivion. They sold us a fraudulent framework. Freeze the $50 million transfer and get a judge to block their defense contract." She paced the living room, her suit snapping with every step. She barked orders to her legal team, demanding they find any loophole, any possible angle to destroy Nicole and retrieve the funds. She ended the call with a swipe of her thumb and turned her glare back toward the venture capitalists. "We will recover the capital," Sylvia announced, projecting hollow authority. "My legal team is dismantling their contract right now. Nobody steals $50 million from me and survives the morning." The 10 minutes that followed were agonizing. Brenda remained backed against the kitchen counter, weeping over her shattered glass and her evaporating status. The investors whispered frantically among themselves, drafting emails to their advisors. Bradley stayed on the floor, his mind racing through escape routes. There was nowhere left to run. When Sylvia's phone rang, she snatched it up, putting the call on speakerphone to reassure her investors. "Well," Sylvia demanded, "tell me you froze the transfer." The voice of her counsel echoed through the penthouse, heavy with defeat and resignation. "There is no legal recourse, Sylvia. I just reviewed the purchase agreement Bradley signed yesterday. It is ironclad. You did not buy a dynamic security suite. You authorized the purchase of an outdated shell. The contract states the software is provided as is with zero guarantees of compliance or modern integration. They sold you exactly what was advertised. You bought a paperweight, and the $50 million transaction cleared an hour ago. It is gone." Sylvia stood paralyzed. The phone slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor. The finality of the lawyer's words sucked the last trace of oxygen from the room. They had destroyed themselves. Before anyone could utter a word of protest, a crash echoed from the front entryway. The doors of the penthouse were kicked open, the wood splintering inward. Federal agents flooded the room. They wore tactical gear with yellow lettering spelling out FBI across their backs. Armed officers secured the perimeter, their boots trampling over the shattered crystal. The friends and investors screamed, scrambling backward against the windows with their hands raised in the air. "Nobody move! Keep your hands where we can see them!" The lead agent roared, his voice cutting through the panic. He stepped into the center of the living room, a folder gripped in his hand. He locked eyes with the executives, Sylvia Vance and Bradley Wilson. Sylvia could barely nod her suit, suddenly looking like a target. Bradley remained frozen on the floor, his breath coming in short gasps. The lead agent stepped forward, presenting the federal warrants. "You are both being placed under investigation for corporate fraud and conspiring to defraud the Department of Defense. We have received a cache of digital evidence, including hidden audio recordings detailing your plans to bypass security audits using illegal shellcode." Bradley felt his heart stop. Nicole had not just built an empire. She meticulously recorded every incriminating conversation he had in their home office. She had weaponized his ego against him, documenting his entire fraudulent scheme, while he thought she was just a quiet background character in his life. The federal agent turned his cold gaze toward the floor, where the vice president was cowering. "Furthermore, Bradley Wilson, you are facing additional charges. A financial audit initiated at dawn has revealed multiple transfers from Omnitech accounts. You are being charged with embezzling over $1 million of funds from Sylvia Vance over the past 8 months. Sylvia snapped her head around, her eyes locking onto Bradley with a murderous realization. While she fought to save her company, the man she trusted had been stealing from her accounts. Brenda let out a piercing shriek of horror, finally understanding the true nature of the man she had married. The federal agents did not wait for an explanation. 2 officers stepped forward, hauling Bradley off the marble floor. They pulled his arms behind his back, the metallic click of cold steel handcuffs echoing through the penthouse with terrifying finality. 3 weeks evaporated in a blur of federal indictments and seized corporate assets. The Omnitech empire, once a towering monument to Sylvia and her ruthless ambition, had been completely dismantled. The Department of Defense did not just pull their contract. They triggered an avalanche of federal investigations that locked down every single bank account associated with the company. Sylvia was stripped of her chief executive title, her passport confiscated, and her sprawling estates frozen by court order. She spent her days trapped in a modest apartment, fighting desperately to stay out of federal prison. Bradley had not been so fortunate. He currently sat in a sterile, cold, windowless concrete holding cell at the maximum security federal detention center, awaiting trial for massive embezzlement, rampant corporate fraud, and intentionally attempting to breach highly classified military security protocols. His tailored suits had been replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit. The man who had spent his entire adult life manipulating women, stealing credit, and destroying his marriage to maintain an illusion of superiority was now completely powerless, shivering and staring blankly at a blank, unforgiving cinderblock wall, wondering how his flawless master plan had disintegrated. Hundreds of miles away, the devastating shockwave of Bradley and his catastrophic failure finally reached the Virginia suburbs. Brenda stepped out of a cheap rideshare vehicle, her manicured hands clutching the strap of her designer handbag. She had spent the last 3 weeks hiding at a friend's house, desperately ignoring the phone calls from debt collectors and bank officials. She thought the storm would eventually pass over her. She thought Bradley would somehow fix the mess and restore their lavish lifestyle. As she walked up the paved driveway of her immaculate 2-story colonial home, a harsh metallic glint caught her eye. A massive, heavy steel padlock hung directly from the front door handle. Taped directly to the polished oak wood was a bright yellow legal notice. Brenda felt her stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. She ripped the paper from the door, her eyes scanning the bold, uncompromising text. It was a formal notice of foreclosure and immediate eviction from the bank. Her mind raced frantically, trying to process the impossible reality. The beautiful house was supposed to be fully paid off. Then the horrifying truth struck her with the force of a physical blow. Bradley had secretly mortgaged the Virginia property to the absolute limit to fund his disastrously lavish lifestyle and cover the mounting corporate debts he hid from everyone. Worse, Brenda had eagerly signed over her entire retirement savings to Bradley just months prior, convinced she was investing in the legendary Apex deal that would cement her status as a millionaire. She had blindly handed over decades of financial security to a man who had squandered every single penny on a phantom software framework built by the daughter-in-law she had relentlessly tormented. She had nothing left. The bank had legally seized the house, all the accounts were completely drained, and her son was facing decades in federal prison. Brenda stood on the front porch, the freezing winter wind whipping around her carefully styled hair, realizing she was entirely destitute. With her credit cards declining and her so-called high society friends suddenly refusing to answer her frantic phone calls, Brenda was left with absolutely no alternatives. The bank representatives had allowed her exactly 15 minutes, under the strict supervision of local law enforcement, to retrieve essential personal items. She emerged from the house clutching 2 battered, oversized suitcases. They were heavy-packed haphazardly with whatever winter clothing and practical items she could grab in her panicked frenzy. The designer shoes and expensive jewelry she prized so highly were left behind, utterly useless in her current reality. She dragged the heavy luggage down the driveway, her expensive heels clicking unevenly on the cold pavement. For the first time in 30 years, Brenda had to navigate the public transit system. She stood at the exposed bus stop, shivering violently in the biting wind as cars sped past, splashing dirty, icy slush onto her expensive wool coat. The woman who had spent her entire life judging others for their lack of wealth, who had sneered at Nicole for driving a modest sedan, was now awkwardly hauling her luggage up the steep steps of a city bus. She endured the 3-hour journey in humiliating silence, staring blankly out the scratched window as the vehicle rumbled toward the upscale, heavily fortified neighborhoods of the Northern Tech Corridor. She was making the ultimate degrading crawl to the only single person left on Earth who had the resources to save her. The bus dropped her off 2 miles from her destination, forcing Brenda to drag her heavy suitcases along the winding tree-lined road as the temperature plummeted further. Her hands were completely numb, her feet blistered, and her lungs burned with every single ragged breath. She kept walking forward through the gathering darkness, her tears freezing on her pale cheeks. Finally, the towering, imposing black iron gates of a massive, hyper-modern, breathtakingly expensive luxury estate suddenly loomed into view. The property was a fortress of glass and steel surrounded by immaculate landscaping and high-end security cameras. It was the private residence of the chief executive officer of Apex Dynamics. Brenda stumbled forward, abandoning her suitcases on the frozen asphalt. She threw herself against the cold iron bars, her manicured nails scraping uselessly against the thick metal. She frantically jabbed the glowing button on the brushed steel intercom panel. Her perfect snooty facade had completely shattered, replaced by raw, unadulterated desperation. "Please." Brenda sobbed loudly into the speaker, her voice hoarse and broken, as the freezing wind whipped violently around her trembling body. "Please, Nicole, I know you are in there watching me. I have absolutely nothing else left. The bank took the house from me today. Bradley is gone forever and ruined. I am so sorry for everything I said to you. Please just open the front gate and let me in." The heavy electronic lock clicked with a loud, sharp metallic thud. The massive iron gates groaned as their hidden gears engaged, slowly pulling the towering bars apart. Brenda stumbled forward, her frozen fingers releasing their desperate grip on the metal. She nearly collapsed onto the pristine, heated concrete of the expansive circular driveway. The harsh, biting wind seemed to suddenly die down as the gates opened fully, revealing the stunning, brightly lit courtyard of the estate. Warm, golden light spilled from the floor-to-ceiling windows of the modern mansion, casting long, sharp shadows across the manicured winter landscaping. Standing at the center of the glowing driveway was Nicole. She did not look like the exhausted, stressed mother Brenda had so viciously kicked out of her home just months prior. She looked radiant, practically glowing with absolute health and untouchable authority. She wore a thick, luxurious cashmere sweater, completely unbothered by the freezing temperature radiating from the open gates. Nestled securely in her arms, bundled in a pristine plush winter coat, was baby Leo. He was thriving, his cheeks round and rosy, his eyes bright and curious, as he looked toward the commotion at the edge of the property. He was a picture of absolute, perfect health. Standing just a few feet behind Nicole's right shoulder was Kendrick. The sharply dressed executive assistant maintained a rigid professional posture, his face an unreadable mask of corporate detachment. He held a sleek silver legal clipboard pressed firmly against his side. He did not look at Brenda with pity. He looked at her like a minor logistical error that was about to be permanently corrected. Brenda took one look at the radiant, untouchable woman and the thriving infant, and her legs completely gave out. She crashed down onto her knees, the sharp impact sending a jolt of pain through her frozen joints, but she did not care. She dropped her head, her perfectly dyed hair hanging in messy, tangled strands across her tear-stained face. She began to sob heavy, racking gasps that echoed loudly across the silent courtyard. "Please." Brenda wailed, her voice cracking as she crawled forward slightly on the heated concrete, leaving wet, dirty streaks behind her ruined designer boots. "You have to believe me, Nicole. I did not know what they were doing to you. Sylvia manipulated me from the very beginning. She filled my head with lies. She told me the Apex deal was legitimate. I did not know Bradley was stealing from her. I did not know he was going to ruin everything. They used me. They took my retirement, my house, my entire life. I am a victim in this too." She tilted her head up, her mascara running down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers. Her eyes locked onto the baby. "Oh, look at him," she choked out, reaching a trembling hand forward into the empty air. "Look at my beautiful grandson. Please, Nicole." I am his grandmother. You cannot leave me out here to freeze in the street. I have absolutely nothing. I do not need to live in the main house. I will not be a burden. I will live quietly in the guest house. I will clean. I will watch Leo. Just give me a room. Just a tiny room. You have so much space here. Please, I am begging you, do not do this to me. It's too. Nicole did not take a single step backward. She did not clutch Leo tighter, nor did she show a single flinch of disgust or anger. She simply stood perfectly still, looking down at the pathetic, shivering woman currently begging for scraps on her driveway. There was absolutely zero empathy in her dark, piercing eyes. She did not yell. She did not scream. She did not unleash the months of suppressed rage and humiliation that Brenda had forced upon her. She simply let the agonizing silence stretch out, allowing Brenda to fully absorb the absolute futility of her groveling. "You are not a victim," Brenda Nicole stated, her voice smooth, level, and terrifyingly calm. "You are exactly what you have always been. A cruel, selfish woman who gambled her entire existence on a stolen idea simply because it allowed you to feel superior. You stood in that kitchen and watched your son tear my life apart. You smiled when he threw me out. You handed me trash bags and told me to take my sick child into the streets. You did not care if we survived the night. You only cared about securing your own unearned luxury." Brenda let out a ragged, desperate whimper, wrapping her arms around her own shivering torso as the truth of Nicole's words pinned her to the concrete. She tried to formulate another excuse, another desperate plea for mercy, but the words died in her throat under Nicole's unwavering stare. Nicole adjusted Leo in her arms, ensuring his warm blanket was perfectly wrapped. She looked back down at the weeping woman. "The hospital was cold the day you threw us out," Brenda Nicole said quietly. Her voice carried no malice, only an arctic, unbreakable truth. "But the real world is much colder." Kendrick stepped forward, his polished shoes completely silent against the pavement. He unclipped a single piece of thick paper from his silver board and extended his arm downward. Brenda gasped, a sudden, pathetic surge of hope illuminating her wet, ruined face. She thought it was a check. She thought her desperate groveling had finally worked, and she was being paid to leave quietly. Her trembling fingers snatched the document from his hand. Her bloodshot eyes rapidly scanned the black ink, but the fleeting hope instantly evaporated, transforming into pure, unadulterated horror. It was not a bank check. It was a printed map detailing the exact bus route to the nearest downtown city homeless shelter. "You chose the wrong woman to cross," Kendrick said quietly. The massive iron gates immediately began to pull firmly shut, leaving Brenda entirely alone, forever. Nicole did not stay to watch the heavy iron gates complete their slow, punishing journey. She turned her back on the freezing wind, wrapping her arms securely around her son, and began the long walk up the pristine, heated driveway. Kendrick fell into step right beside her, perfectly synchronized, his silver clipboard, reflecting the warm, golden glow spilling from the massive windows of the estate. They did not look back. Behind them, the massive iron structures finally met in the center. The locking mechanism engaged with a loud, definitive, echoing clang that sounded like a vault ceiling shut. The heavy sound reverberated through the freezing evening air, marking the absolute, irreversible end of Brenda and her access to the family she had so viciously discarded. Brenda remained collapsed on the frozen concrete sidewalk outside the property line. She clutched the single piece of standard printer paper in her trembling, manicured hands. The printed map to the downtown city homeless shelter flapped wildly in the biting winter wind. Her two battered suitcases stood abandoned a few feet away, dusted with a fresh layer of falling snow. The woman who had built her entire identity on social superiority and unearned wealth was now completely indistinguishable from the desperate, broken people she had spent her life mocking. She buried her face in her frozen hands and sobbed into the empty, indifferent street, entirely erased from the world of luxury she had tried to steal. The scene abruptly shifts from the sprawling, wealthy tech corridor to the suffocating, claustrophobic atmosphere of a federal holding facility. The walls are a sickly, institutional gray, illuminated by the harsh, unrelenting glare of caged fluorescent lights. The air smells of strong bleach and stale sweat. Bradley sits slouched on a bolted metal bench in the corner of a bleak common recreation room. His bright orange jumpsuit hangs loosely on his frame, his previously immaculate hair now greasy and unkempt. The arrogance that once defined every aspect of his personality has been completely hollowed out, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. He grips a battered plastic cup of lukewarm water, his shoulders hunched against the oppressive reality of his ruined life. High up in the corner of the room, secured behind a thick cage of reinforced steel wire, a small mounted television plays quietly. The volume is low, competing with the dull, echoing murmur of the other inmates shuffling through the block. Bradley slowly lifts his head, his bloodshot eyes drifting upward toward the glowing monitor. He does not want to look, but he is completely paralyzed, drawn to the broadcast like a moth to an open flame. On the small, grainy screen, the primary financial news networks are broadcasting live, their bold red and green ticker tapes scrolling rapidly across the bottom of the feed. The breaking news graphic flashes brightly, announcing the highly anticipated initial public offering of Apex Dynamics. The camera cuts to the bustling, chaotic floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Standing triumphantly on the high wooden podium overlooking the cheering crowds of brokers and investors is Nicole. She looks absolutely breathtaking. She is wearing a razor-sharp, tailored midnight blue power suit that commands total authority. Her posture is flawless, radiating supreme confidence and absolute victory. She is not alone on the platform. Surrounding her is a diverse, vibrant team of brilliant engineers, loyal colleagues, and dedicated executives who helped build her impenetrable digital fortress. They are laughing, clapping, and cheering wildly. Nicole steps forward, raising her hand to grasp the heavy wooden gavel. She looks directly into the primary broadcast camera, her dark eyes flashing with fierce, undeniable triumph. She swings the gavel down, striking the opening bell with a resounding, authoritative crash that echoes through the financial capital of the world. The trading floor explodes into a deafening roar of applause as confetti rains down around her. Bradley watches the screen, his chest heaving as the plastic cup slips from his trembling fingers and spills across the dirty linoleum floor. He is trapped in a concrete cage, utterly ruined, while the woman he called useless rings the bell to open a billion-dollar public company. The ambient noise of the cheering stock exchange and the dull murmur of the federal prison slowly fade away, replaced by the clear, steady, commanding voice of Nicole, echoing over the visuals. People always assume that hitting rock bottom is the absolute end of the story. Nicole says her voiceover, resonating with cold, calculated precision. They think the crushing weight of betrayal is supposed to break you. They expect you to shatter, to cry, to beg for a compromise. But what they fail to understand is that rock bottom is not a grave. It is a foundation. It is the solid, unyielding bedrock where you finally strip away all the toxic illusions and begin to build something completely impenetrable. They thought they could discard me because they mistook my quiet loyalty for weakness. They mistook my patience for compliance. They thought they were the architects of my destruction, but they were entirely wrong. I did not just survive their coordinated betrayal. I studied it. I mapped out their arrogance, I calculated their weaknesses, and I weaponized their own blinding greed against them. I let them believe they were winning the game right up until the exact moment I bought the very ground they were standing on. The camera slowly zooms in on Nicole standing on the stock exchange podium, the confetti falling around her victorious team. I did not shed a single tear for the life I lost. Her voiceover continues sharp and resolute. I have absolutely zero regrets. I simply built a fortress they could never breach and left them outside in the freezing cold. The screen lingers on Nicole. She looks straight into the camera lens and offers one final, brilliant, ruthless, and perfectly elegant smile. The final image holds for a breathless moment, radiating pure, unapologetic victory before smoothly fading to absolute black.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain through every trial.